So I guess on a more abstract, theoretical level, how did you get into this breathing? I mean,
How did I get into the
how did
breathing?
you get into it?
Other than the first breath, like we all did when we were born?
Yeah.
That's how we all got into breathing.
I guess,
you know.
I guess you mentioned how breathing can add more consciousness to your life. Did it begin that theoretical for you, or did it begin more anatomical?
Well, I would say that, well, there's a couple of stages that I would have to point to answer that question. The first, let me sit up here because it's easier for the camera, because I'll be on both of them then. So the question is, how did I get into this breathing thing?
How did breathing become
my central focus?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my first sort of really significant experience that had to do with yoga, I wouldn't necessarily say, even in retrospect, had anything specific to do with the breathing, but it had everything to do with setting the stage. And that was when I took my first yoga class. And the only thing I really remember, and I know I was asked to do a sun salutation, you know, because I know the class structure. It was a Shivananda class, and they're all structured the same way. So I know at the beginning of the class I was asked to do a sun salutation, which would have involved me figuring out how to get these big flexion and extension movements in my body to coordinate with inhaling and exhaling. And I know I probably wasn't good at that right away. Right. So that would have been the first time that somebody asked me to do something like that, to coordinate my mental focus, my body motions, and the process of inhaling and exhaling. And I would maintain that for anybody that's never paid attention to that before, being asked to do that is mind-blowing. To me, that's actually the core of what we do in yoga. I often say that the maximum benefits people get from what we do are from the simplest things we teach them. And that's the simplest thing. Just inhale, exhale. Yeah. But that's not what I remember about the first class. What I remember about the first class was the final relaxation. When I was in Shavasana, after all this crazy stuff I'd been asked to do. And that I went to a place that I had never been before in my mind-body experience. I went to a place of conscious, intentional relaxation, and I wasn't asleep. That was very, very different. That's what got me back. That's what got me back. And then, you know, I took a beginner's course and all of that, and I remember learning all of the breathing stuff that was part of that system, you know, not just the sun salutation, but alternate nostril breathing and, you know, the Kapalabhati and, you know, stuff like that. But that just that wasn't a central focus for me. Even up to when I learned to be a yoga teacher in that tradition. I originally was more interested in the anatomical differences in the bones and musculature that would allow one person to do an asana easily compared to another person. Because when you're teaching in that system, you're teaching the same class every single time. It's a set sequence. And so when you're doing the same thing every time, you don't have to worry about how to generate the class, right? What I was able to focus on was how different everyone was trying to do the same class. So I got to see all of that. The thing that sparked my interest in the breath, as it related to all of that, you know, as the context, was actually long after I had started teaching, become a Swami, got transferred to Los Angeles to run the LA community for the Shivananda organization, and I met one of my oldest yoga friends out there, a guy named Larry Payne, who is one of the founders of the International Association of Yoga Therapists, and he is, at the time, wasn't that he hadn't started it yet, but he was running a yoga center he had started in his home in Marina del Rey called Samatha. And I met him, and he had just recently returned from a trip to India where he had made a point to go to all of the big teachers. He went to Iyengar, he went to Mysore, he went to Madras to study with Desikachar. He went to, I think he went to Lonavala, to the Kavalyadam, which is another center of yoga and research. And anyway, he went to all these places, and he was most impressed with Desikachar. He was telling me the story of his trip. And I asked him what was so great about Desikachar. And he would only tell me this one thing. But this is what made the difference. He said, it's all in the breath. I was like, what does that mean? It's all in breath. I don't know how well he understood it at that point. He had just met the guy, right? But it had made an impression on him, and what he said made a real impression on me. So I started observing, along with everything else that I had been noticing in the classes I was teaching, how people were breathing. And how that had a lot to do with whether they were able to do these things or not. And I began my own sort of experimentation, investigation. And if you go too far in the direction of experimentation in the Shivananda organization, you will find yourself no longer in the Shivananda organization, which I did. But fortunately, shortly after, I got to work at a place called the International Sports Medicine Institute, which was in West LA. And it was in the early 80s. And everything that was going on in sports medicine at that time was about, whoops, sorry, that's me as a Swami doing the wedding, wrong picture. That's the sports medicine group, was about getting these Olympic athletes ready for the Olympics. You know, people, well, they weren't Olympic athletes yet, they were trying to make the team. And a lot of them were coming here for therapy. And so I took all of my interest in yoga and breathing and all that and began getting a lot more information about the body. I began seeing a lot of x-rays and a lot of people getting treated for various musculoskeletal problems. And the initial effect of it was it made me want to stop teaching yoga like forever and right away. Because as soon as I saw what people's spines looked like, it just scared the living crap out of me. And I couldn't imagine putting those spines into the shapes that I had been with. I felt very lucky I had not crippled anybody. I felt a little like William J. Broad.
I started lecturing him about that.
Yeah, I'm sure he hasn't stopped talking yet. They put him into the Yoga Journal conference on a panel about injuries, which I was kind of pissed I wasn't on, but I will be in the front row. Anyway, so, but it made me want to stop teaching. I got very concerned about people's spines and all that. It took me a while to integrate everything I'd learned into a way of teaching that I felt was safe and acceptable to me, you know. And partly it was the athletes, because they wanted flexibility training. And so I took some of the tools I learned in yoga as a yoga teacher and started applying them to the very specific field of flexibility training for athletics. But it all started coming together in a major way when I finally met Desikachar. But that was a lot later. That was in '87. Larry told me the thing about the breath in like '81. So I had 6 years of experimenting and learning about anatomy and, you know, getting back to a way of teaching that I felt was a little more anatomically safe and appropriate. And then there's a whole other story about how that first seminar where I met Desikachar just ruined my breathing for about 6 months. Because then I got into this upside-down breathing thing that he teaches, which I had heard about, but I was completely ignoring because I thought it was stupid. And, you know, I knew how to breathe. I was taught, you know, belly, ribs, chest, 3-part breathing. That's how you breathe, you know. That's yogic breathing. First you fill here, then here, then here. And I had a whole system based on that, you know. And when I met Desikachar, and the first time I was in a seminar, someone asked me to breathe here, and then here, and then here. At first I was like, not doing it. I'm the master of the 3-part breath. I teach that. I have a whole breath-centered thing that I'm doing. I have a studio in New York. People are going to come and study with me, and they're paying me for this training that I've organized, and I ain't changing that. I was too deeply invested in it. And, you know, when I finally did, on a single breath, by the way, decide, okay, I'll try it his way. So it was like someone, you know, if you have like a DC circuit spinning a fan, and it's going this way for years and years and years. It's been a certain amount of inertia, right? You know, and you pull the wires off of it, you reverse them, you put them back on the motor, all right? All of a sudden the current's flowing the opposite way, but the inertia of the fan is still going the original way. You're gonna blow some bearings or something. Something's gonna, the housing is gonna shake loose, something's gonna happen. And that's what it felt like in my body for about 6 months before I sorted it all out. So, you know, I would say that Desikachar sparked my interest in breathing, from that initial thing Larry said. And then he ruined my breathing. And then the process of putting it back together and understanding what the hell had happened, that's a pretty straight line from then to like right now in this moment. And that's an ongoing sort of inquiry as to why certain breathing patterns do work better for certain people at certain times and what's the anatomy behind it. Because there is no anatomical explanation within the tradition for any of it. It's not encoded in anatomical language. It's all yogic philosophy and maybe some Ayurveda, but nothing about the diaphragm. There's no word for diaphragm in any of the teachings. There's none of it, And what information there is anatomically that gets imparted when people are learning to teach yoga, that was all added in at a much later date, and with a lot of inaccuracy and misconception, unfortunately. And I found out pretty quickly that I wasn't going to get the anatomical answers I wanted from Desikachar or any of his senior people, because it just hadn't been taught that way. So that became sort of my project. Mm-hmm. Oh, breathing project. So that's what this place is, and that's what I'm doing. It's a very long-winded answer to the question, but there's no other way to answer it without telling a little of that story.
Can I ask one add-on?
Sure, you can ask.
Do you want to come from here?
No, I can. I want to hear you. Yeah.
One of my favorite teachers is Marco Rojas, which maybe some of you know, and he was in LA. Do you know Marco Rojas?
If it was in LA in the early 80s.
No, it wasn't. No, I think it was in the 90s. Anyway, one of his little mantras is feel how it feels to be in the now. And I feel like, I presume maybe you dealt with a fair number of maybe endurance athletes. And I feel like whether it be respect to how you deal with pain. I mean, I'm a cyclist, so Lance Armstrong's a big fan.
He's a big fan of yours?
I'm a big fan of his. but I imagine, because I'm a terrible breather, but I imagine that once you recognize that breath is that moment, and you focus that attention on that moment, you actually, the idea of reading a book for 3 hours, or being on a bicycle for 5 hours, or being in a 2-hour yoga class, it simplifies things. It takes the complexity out of what's going to happen, 5 minutes from now, you're really in the moment.
Yeah.
But I imagine that takes a lot of training.
It does. It does. But I think that that's one of the great things that yoga practice offers people. It's an opportunity to, as I was saying earlier, to rearrange your responses to stressful situations. When we first experience physical distress when we're quite young, we don't have much of a choice about how we react. We react the way any young person would. We brace ourselves. We don't want to feel it. We don't know it's not going to kill us. We don't have a long-term perspective on how to deal with a distressing situation. We do our best to escape it, and if we can't, we do our best not to feel it. And this is what we carry into our lives as adults unless it's challenged or changed. And I think, athletics offers us a chance to change it. Yoga certainly does. Any kind of practice that brings the body and the mind together, and seeks to go beyond whatever limitations we may experience is going to do that. In yoga, it's very much in the forefront. It's very much the explicit part of what we're after. And the breath is a tremendously valuable tool for that, because you have to breathe anyway. You're going to be breathing. You might as well make that part of what you're doing. And from that perspective, it can become an endlessly fascinating source of amusement and interest, because every breath is different. If you know where to look, if you can bring your focus into this pathway of shape change that's going on in the system that is breathing, it's a tremendously fascinating thing. And you'll find yourself perfectly at ease in a pose that you may have been just looking at the clock, wondering when the teacher was going to get you out of it, and then you'll have a wholly different experience, saying like, wow, 5 minutes has gone by and I'm still here. Imagine that. But it's actually been shown, and I was actually looking at one of the TED Talks from Adelaide. This fellow is a neuroscientist who was talking about how pain is completely a construct of this. I don't know if you've seen this one. That the expectation of future experience based on past experience combined with a certain sensation adds up to something your body creates in the way of pain or not pain. You cannot register something that should be rather painful if you're comparing it to something in the past that was similar, that wasn't threatening. He was talking about walking through the woods and a little twig, scratched him on the thigh. So he felt the sensation, it went to his brain, it registered against past experience. It was like, oh, it's a twig, ignore it, and he kept going. Turns out he got bit by a snake, and he almost died. But because it felt similar to a twig, he ignored it. There was not enough pain to make him pay attention to what it was. So he's walking through the woods a while after he recovered from the snake bite, and a twig hits him, and his whole system goes, "Ah!" Because the last time he had that sensory experience, he remembered, something in him remembered, that was a snake bite, ah! And it was like, oh, it's a twig, you know. But it was real pain. So he uses that as an illustration of the fact that our mind is constantly constructing experiences for us based on what's happened in the past and what we expect will happen in the future or not happen in the future. And you know, the experience I've had working with people, you know, in the clinic is very much that way. People come in with all sorts of stories about how long they've been in pain and how severe it is, and they have evidence about what's causing it, especially if they come in with MRIs or reports about, oh, I've got a blown disc and this and that. You know, and I listen and I'm very polite and it's like, good, and I know that we can deconstruct that pain experience for them by, number one, cognitively explaining how 60.5% of non-symptomatic people, if you give them MRI, show the same degree of disc damage that you have. It doesn't explain anything. And number two, we're going to ask you to move and breathe in a different way and get you to do things that you didn't think you could do, which, by the way, if your pain was caused by the disc, should have caused you even more pain. And if it doesn't, then they realize, wow, you know, this whole experience has been a construct. It's been a belief system. Which is why I see what we do here more as educational than therapeutic. I don't call myself a therapist. I call myself a yoga educator. Because to me, everything even though I had my hands on her and this and that, it looks like I'm doing therapy. It's just an educational thing. It's like, look, your belly can do this. That means your chest can do that, and this and that. It's empowering the person with knowledge and experience that allows them to get past whatever's in their way. And to me, that's education. You know, and also, I don't want to be in a therapeutic profession. I don't want to be regulated by the government. I don't want to have to file insurance claims for third-party reimbursement. I don't want to have to compete with all the other therapeutic professions out there for a slice of the pie. You know, who needs that? That's just, ugh. We're educators. You know, I'd like to have this stuff taught at university. I'd like to be able to get degrees in this. You know, why not? Why can't someone get a bachelor's or a master's or a doctorate in this stuff? We have perfectly wonderful educational institutions out there, which, by the way, have medical schools. So if there was a yoga program at a university with a medical school, number one, that program would be able to draw on all the different departments, from religion to anthropology to philosophy to medical to everything. You could do such a kick-ass yoga program at a university because of all these different things that yoga connects with. And by the same token, you would have high-quality yoga practice being taught there, not just to the students, but available to everybody, including the medical students. Imagine that. A medical student practicing yoga simultaneous with their medical education. At that point, it's not a question of making ourselves acceptable to the medical profession, because we are the medical profession. You know, and we're playing to what our strong suit is, meaning we build relationships. That's what we do. This whole thing you saw here is just a relationship. You know, it's connecting with somebody and getting them connected to themselves and to the universe they inhabit in a way that's more integrated. You know, that's all educational as far as I'm concerned. And you know, I don't think we should try to turn ourselves into therapists or doctors, or like William J. Broad suggests in his book. That's stupid. That's not who we are. You know, and it's a betrayal of the people who've been coming to us all this time, because they're coming to us precisely because we're not medicine. Why would we want to turn ourselves into the thing that our clients are fleeing? It's crazy, I tell you. It's madness. Soylent Green is people. Where did that come from? Anyway. Oh, it's Charlton Heston, right. The madness thing was Planet of the Apes. It's a madhouse. I just conflated two Charlton Heston movies in my head. That shows you what goes on in here. It's a scary place. Anyway, so yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, let's take a break, and we'll come back, and we'll do our class at 6:30. Thanks, guys. And I think we need to replace the batteries in this microphone.